How's it going, Faffers? As many of you know by now, the beta patch has been live for quite a while, but only until recently have they decided to release the patch notes, which is to illustrate on the very interesting changes that are going to be up and coming and what they intend for in the next balance release, which, who knows, that could be another month or so. But I decided that since we're probably not going to get Petric's beautiful, beautiful balance review, I decided that I was going to tackle it myself. I intend to use this video as a way to sort of branch out and give some people some insight onto the balance patch that's going to be coming up, and maybe give some feedback to it as well. Maybe the balance people might appreciate a video like this, but who knows? I'm just a 1600 scrub. Live at it. Another thing to notice too is that this is a beta, so you can't really expect to see these changes being the definitive final products. There's certainly going to be some changes and testing done to adjust these values. So at the time being, this is what we've got, and hopefully we can get something going and see what we have in store for the future. Patch 7303 is a very interesting one so far. It's got not a whole lot going on, to be frank, but the various changes and additions to this seem very interesting. It's nothing as drastic as the last one was, where we had T3 land nerf, we had experimental nerfs, overcharge rework. There's just a whole lot of minute details, and some of them a bit more significant than others. You'll notice what those ones are very soon, but to be honest, I'm not really sure if a lot of these are going to make a huge deal. I believe that some of these changes are basically shifting towards a different pace. I wouldn't say that any of these changes do a whole lot of buffing besides a few and nerfing of a few things, so it's nothing that really to get your panties, caught up under, but we'll find out how this goes. So starting off, we've got a hot meme here going with the Mongoose. Yes, the long overdue buff to the Mongoose, which increases the muzzle velocity and the damage for its main chain gun, or whatever it's called. Gatling gun, says it right there. And then some increased or decreased recharge time and a bit more accuracy. A welcome addition to the Mongoose, even though it pales in comparison to the pillars, unfortunately. The cost efficiency for having pillars is just not really worth going with the Mongoose over that. Although this does make them a bit more viable, especially against Auroras, so maybe this insignificant little change will do something for the Mongoose in the long run, but I really don't have any hopes going on there for that. Next up is a bit of a rework for the T2 and T3 mobile shields, as they're getting a bit of a mass increase in cost while decreasing their energy maintenance, which will take less of a toll on energy income, as well as a overage spill modifier being increased, which I assume from that means the damage that overspills from excessive damage that takes down the shield. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not very educated on certain statistical points here, but this is kind of an interesting one, since now these are going to be a little bit more manageable on the field, but will just take a bit more manpower or cost rather to get them out there, which is pretty nice, since especially for the T3 shield being so energy intensive that it's very difficult to keep enough of them going. Well, and this change doesn't really buff or nerf them in any particular way, although I will complain that the T3 mobile shield is given a huge cost increase, especially considering that even though it's got half the maintenance, it's almost doubled the cost and a bit more build time, which is unfortunate. However, I will say that the shield recharge time being decreased is pretty nice. I gotta say that, having the T3 mobile shields gets a bit difficult to work with, especially when their shield doesn't really recharge quick enough. So that's a sort of nice little tad bit boost for that, even though, it takes a bit more to build those. However, yeah, in the end, I am appreciative of the fact that T3 shield or mobile shield will be a bit more manageable to run while I'm trying to support my Navy my land army, etc. Next few up here on the list are nothing really significant. I'm mostly just going to pass over this, but the torpedo damages that are on the Vagner, the Brick, and the Otham have been increased. So I guess in a certain way, their little torpedo damage isn't going to be so pebbly. It's just going to do a little bit more oomph against, some ACU hiding under the water. Might kill some T1 subs if they're in mass spam and in the water. So that's pretty neat to have. And the Harbinger can once again shoot while reclaiming. That's sweet. Nothing gets me harder than, doing my laundry and pounding some noobs on ladder, am I right? T1 Mobile Anti-Air also gets a bit of a touch-up as all factions get a insignificant little mass cost increase. Insignificant being one way to put it, because T1 stage is anything, couple mass dots is pretty significant, but here they get a bit more of a mass cost increase. I guess that's, as it says, preventing it from vetting off of one bomber kill. So that's alright. Nothing really significant there. And Seraphim and UEF get a little bit of a HP reduction. Those things were always a bit tanky and nothing that I really paid attention to much. So, yeah, that's just that, Speaking of mobile anti-air, T3 is also getting a bit of a change, particularly a buff, which is increasing their speed, their mobility a bit, and as well as adding some more range to their anti-air capability, which is alright since T3 Mobile Anti-Air is such a niche unit. I mean, after all, it was an addition by the FAF community, and so it's been, it's pretty alright. I don't think it really does much for them since they are already just not really all that resourceful compared to SAMs, but it's maybe it might give them a bit more of an edge now. Although the UEF one gets a little bit of a bonus since it already is shit. It gets a damage radius buff to 1.5. I suppose that might help its chances of hitting its fucking target, so that's pretty nice. T2 and T3 engineers now have increased speed, the same as about a T1 engineer, which is pretty alright since pathfinding as cancerous as it is. This kind of helps them out, so... Wait, is this the Scathis rework everyone's been talking about? Well, this one's a bit of a doozy here, isn't it? Scathis is being considered an endgamer again, or at least they're trying to change it so that it is. Which, as it would appear, it's double the mass and energy cost while being 3 times the build time. And quite an interesting rework here. It now shoots 20 shells every 20 seconds, and I believe that's within a certain small time period. I believe there's you can test it out yourself, but it's very interesting. It's got a bit less damage, but all of that compacted into a very short volley, and then much bigger damage radius, as well as the maximum firing range being 2,000. 2,000 is more than the Salvation, and the minimum range increased as well. But I mean, overall, this is a very interesting change, but I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here to say that even though the Scathis change is pretty good, might make it an actual good experimental again, the Scathis is a shit unit anyway, because unfortunately, the one complaint I have about this rework, I think, is that Scathis is a mobile T4 artillery unit, and this basically completely wipes the slate as far as it being able to use its mobility, which is pretty dumb. I mean, how can you really, balance around the fact that this thing is slow as fuck? It sets up and moves out at such a slow pace and really can't really get anywhere at all. And so it becomes such an easy target to take out. And, that would be all right, with bigger range. But unfortunately, it doesn't get to utilize its mobility, which is a problem. I just don't think that really the Scathis was a well-designed unit anyway, and I guess this is the best that they could come up with. My only alternative idea to what the Scathis could do is, like, if they kept everything with the way that its, firing cycle goes, the damage and whatnot, kept everything here, except that it would have reduced range and perhaps a ton more HP, because right here they basically mark it down to 9,000 HP, which is almost half as much as what it used to. And I feel like you could utilize the Scathis a bit in that way as well, but unfortunately range is a big deal, and without mobility, it's also you're not going to get a whole lot done with this. So I guess it's a well-deserved change, just not one that I can really get behind all that much, just because the Scathis is just poorly designed anyway. Moving on to the Swiftwin. Nothing much has changed here besides the cost, which involves all three elements here. Mass and energy costs have been increased to a slight degree, while build time is about 200 more build time. But either way, the Swiftwin, I never really understood why it was changed in this particular instance. I guess to a certain degree, I can understand as a ladder player, because ladder games, and especially in the air game, doesn't really change all that much. The dynamic of it is very slow and not an emphasis usually in ladder games. So Swiftwin does take a big stride whenever it comes to the Aon game, whenever they move on to T2 air. And they tend to dominate, especially in that regard. So I can understand it to that degree there. Although the unfortunate thing about it is that Swiftwins don't really have a major presence in team games all that often. For the most part, you're going to have a bit of T1 air, and then this shift into the T2 and very quickly into the T3 stage, which the Aon players don't generally have a good presence in the T2 to really utilize Swiftwins to that extent. And this kind of draws back from them, especially because only a few ASFs can really take down, not to the same degree as Swiftwins to interceptors, but ASFs are incredibly powerful even against Swiftwins, and a few microed ones can really take down this little group here. And so it's a bit unfortunate. It's going to be less likely to use Swiftwins in team games and just make it much less interesting or resourceful within those scenarios where Swiftwins can have a presence, but, team games. Renegades have also been given a very slight, even though it doesn't say in the statistics here, they've been given the ability to shoot on the move, which is very interesting. And the very curious thing about this is that they were given a very slight cost increase, which is to all three stats as well, which I don't quite understand exactly. I guess the factor being that Renegades have such incredible area of effect to their weapons that this might pose a dramatic influence over other T2 gunships, but overall it's like I don't really see the reason for it. I guess it's warranted to a certain degree. I guess in time we'll see if this was a worthwhile change. My beloved Natha here, the T2 Seraphim Bomber, has been given a slight, very slight additional damage buff to their bomb, which is in order to kill UEF T2 structures such as the T2 mechs, which is really insignificant, but I guess that's a very nice addition since you're trying to go for T2 mech snipes on the UEF structures, and they're barely left with like 75 HP. So nice little compliment there for the Natha. Not gonna really influence very much else otherwise. And torpedo bombers also get a nerf, which is to their mass and energy cost. Now this one I can kind of understand. This is particularly influential in team games, especially sentence games, where torp bombers are especially easy to spam out, and to that degree they end up being very cost efficient, I suppose. I don't know how cost efficient, but they're able to do a lot of damage to Navy, and I suppose this is their way of addressing that issue. Restorers are getting a little bit of a buff here with a bit more speed in the air, and as well as increased damage for their air to ground, and it's pretty well warranted. I don't think there's very much else you should do with restorers, especially when their AA capabilities are quite good, and the previous issues that people have had with these is that they were too efficient against ASFs. So in this sort of way, they reinforce the fact that the Restorer, even though it is capable of anti-air weaponry, it is not particularly emphasized on that aspect. And in this way, they try to help it out by giving it some more damage against ground units. Also, whalers and broadswords, they will no longer chase air units when they fly by. That's pretty nice, or at least as it says here, chase air units. And now the Novack's W text is getting an interesting change here. It's getting more mass, energy, and build time increase, while in compensation for the fact that it's getting a little bit more damage and an increase to radar, omni, and vision radius. Very cool. I don't know how much of a difference this damage buff is going to do, and I feel like they are particularly wary of that. With how much more it's going to cost to build this thing, I wonder if it's going to be a bit more efficient, but then again, it's one of those things that people have always asked for, but the balance team has been particularly nervous about doing because the Novacks can borderline become overpowered with some slight adjustments. So I guess in this way, they're trying to adjust it to that factor and hopefully make it a bit better than how it usually stands as a meme unit. The Bulwark now is getting a bit of a nerf, and a very slight one, in the way that its mobility and its size is going to be adjusted. The speed has been reduced, the turn rate has been reduced, and this uniform scale, meaning the very size and hitbox, I believe, of the unit itself, is going to be a bit bigger. So it makes it much more of a easier target for other navies to be able to hit and kill, as well as just an increase to the damage modifier, or overspill rather. And so I guess this is an indirect way of countering nerfing rather the UEF T3 Navy, especially because on certain games like Settons, the Bulwark becomes a very influential part of the Navy, and allowing the Bulwark to be a bit more accessible to kill would indirectly solve that problem to a certain extent. I don't know how effectively this nerf will be for the Bulwark. And then some small tweaks here and there. The Torpedo Defense of the Aon frigate works more effectively. We'll be the judge of that. The Siren Cruiser anti-air missiles move faster and in a more efficient way. I guess that's cool. The Siren does suck at anti-air, so maybe increasing the capability is a smart idea. And the Aon Destroyer is getting a bit more AoE, just like an increment of that. I would complain about that as a Seraphim player, but honestly, the Seraphim Destroyer does a pretty good job of switching targets with its lasers, so I guess I don't really have much to say on that regard. And then the Omens Range has been fixed. That's a bit of a change that was old sometime in the last patch. And then the Tempest is getting a bit of a reduced mass cost to 22,000 instead of 24,000. Honestly, I don't really care. Tempest is a bit of a hot piece of garbage, if you ask me, and it really isn't going to help it in that case, but I guess a little bit more bang for your buck. TMD Build Time has been reduced, and I'm not going to talk about this one too much because it's going to piggyback off of another change much further down the road, so I'll get back to this one in a little bit. And then T2 Land HQ also has been given a little bit less of a build time, which is very interesting because I remember there was a particular change for T2 Land that increased the build time and cost, which I suppose as a result of certain changes with T3 Land and whatnot, maybe this is more to give T2 Land, a bit more of a presence earlier on, and I'm quite alright with that idea. The more Ilshivas, the better. The T2 Air HQ has been given a bit of a small nerf to its cost because at the time, I don't think people realized how much cheaper T2 Air was to rush, which I suppose would be natural because air as it is just costs a lot of power, but this is a bit interesting. I guess this might counteract some certain strategies that have been coming about as of late, like gunship rushing, so unfortunately it's not going to be as prevalent in the current meta. And now T2 Artillery is being given a much greater minimum range distance, which I suppose is to stop T2 Artillery from practically point-blank firing at anything that's so close to it. And I welcome that change, although 50 might be a bit too much in my opinion. It's quite alright since, it is a bit ridiculous how close range the thing can fire. Also, Eye of Rand is given some energy storage. Neat. T2 Radar is getting a little bit of a buff with 50 energy less maintenance here, which is pretty nice. You might be able to see that a little bit earlier on in the game as you're going along. Now, nuke launchers are getting an odd change here. Their build power and missile build time are increasing quite a bit, almost double the build power. And I assume that the nuke launchers are going to build the nukes this exact same rate as they currently are. However, this is going to directly affect the ability to assist them at a very quick pace, which means that you can't really assist them hard and get them launched at a reasonable time. And the fact that SMDs haven't really been changed in this way either basically means that nuke rushing is not going to be a very prevalent strategy anymore. At least it's not as likely going to succeed, since you can still maintain the same build power on SMDs and they'll still get up there pretty quick, but nukes are not. So in a way, it kind of directly nerfs nukes instead of, well, it's supposed to nerf the ability to assist them. So I definitely don't think that nukes are going to be as painstakingly good as they currently are. Now, I'm not even going to bother spitting out the specific stats here, but basically T2 static shields are not going to be as easy to spam. Their build times have been increased to some extent and are getting a nerf to their recharge time, which makes it basically so that their shields don't come up quite as quickly as they used to. Now, these two additional changes are pretty much the exact same thing. The UEF and Cybran T3 shield, or at least the T3 shield for UEF and the ED5 for Cybran, is getting a bit more shield HP so that it can actually withstand a single shot from a Mavor. I guess that's important. I guess it's relevant enough so that it doesn't, everything underneath doesn't get blasted under the following shot from a Mavor. And the difference here is that the UEF one is getting a bit more of a mass and energy cost, very minor bit, whereas the Cybran one is not getting a change or cost change, which I assume is because it's already overpriced, as it states right there. What the hell am I saying? All right, moving on into the ACU upgrades, in which finally we're getting a bit of a buff for the Seraphim ACU's regen aura, which, although looking at it, might seem pretty good with the max health multiplier increased, the range, the added... No, they took away some ACU HP, that's unfortunate, and minimum regen, which seems alright, although for both of these upgrades for the advanced one as well, going, it's got 1.2 multiplier and then minimum regen 15 and more range. Unfortunately, they end up just taking away some HP and adding a bit more cost to the upgrade, which in practice, it might seem pretty good and alright, but it's almost comparatively the same upgrade cost as the gun, the first one anyway, and so it makes it very difficult, at least in the sort of direct impact as a support role, for it to be anything comparable to the gun upgrade. And unfortunately, it just, I don't know, there's something about it that just makes it a bit less enticing, even though it is a welcome change. It's just that I wish it could be a bit less on the upgrade cost. I don't know. The thing I'll add too is that for some reason the upgrade adds this a bit of effect. It's almost like a green cloud, and I don't know what the deal is. It almost looks like they got gassed by the Green Goblin, and I kind of don't like it. I don't know if this is a permanent effect, but if they do end up keeping like a sort of effect around the units when they're within range of this aura, I'd rather they kept it the same color, or at least tone down the effect so that it isn't as ugly looking. I don't want my units just prowling around look like they haven't been taking a shower for the last 2 weeks, you know what I'm saying? The next two upgrades is pretty straightforward and simple. The first Aon personal shield is getting a bit less of a recharge time, so that's pretty nice. Little tender care and love for the Aon, unfortunately, with their shields being pretty insignificant at the moment. And the Chrono Dampener, which is another Aon related upgrade, which is getting a kind of a quasi buff. The additional 3000 HP added to the upgrade is pretty significant, I think. And even though the stun time has been reduced for stunning units there, it kind of gives it a bit more relevancy, even though it doesn't really directly affect the upgrade. It is going to be a bit nicer to have since, with the additional HP, you can survive a little better when you're using your stun. And I imagine pairing that with the gun upgrades on the Aon Com will make it a bit more interesting to use on the battlefield. Now, last but not least, we have the tactical missile, which is being given a mass increase, which I assume means that the missile itself within the TML structure is going up in price, and that applies the same to the ACU, but the difference being now The ACU's TML, or Tactical Missile, which is on the UEF and Seraphim, is getting a bit more of a build time increase. Now, I imagine that of all the changes to this patch, this one might piss some people off to some extent. It doesn't seem like a big change here, although the ACU build time for the Tactical Missile is going to be kind of a big deal. It'll make it so that these mech snipes or PGen snipes are going to be much less frequent and substantial. And especially in tying back to the fact that the TMD is in fact going to have its build time reduced, it seems like the balance team is trying to push away ACU tac snipes on certain eco structures and to give players a bit more of a chance to respond to these, which to the dismay of some, I believe it's going to influence whether or not this is a worthwhile upgrade. But in the end, I mean, it is kind of a big deal because sometimes, you know, you're trying to get your shit together and then for some reason you just notice that your first mech has been sniped, and by the time you start building your TMD, you pretty much have lost an additional 3 more or some other structures. So it could be pretty brutal, so I can understand why they would move in this direction, although incoming rants and complaints, you know, this is going to be expected as much. And that's pretty much it for the balance beta, basically. 3703. It's definitely one of the interesting ones. Nothing too crazy, but pretty good nonetheless. So I would highly suggest going out there, testing yourself, get some buddies together and do some team games with it. And then I would say just let the balance team know how you feel about it. If there's certain things you like, dislike, or what you could recommend to them. I'm sure they're open to suggestions and all that good stuff. So yeah, that's going to be it for me today. And, well, faff on, my gamers, my dudes.